Now, before I introduce our next stage, can I just say that after this, the growth clinic at the back over there will still be going on till 4 o'clock. And there's all sorts of interesting things there, from advice with marketing, all sorts of things. I won't tell you anymore, so you'll have to go and have a look out of curiosity. So that's after this. But first of all, we're going to be focusing on future thinking. How do we transition to a net zero world? And we're going to be talking, obviously, in terms of global issues, but also how they resonate in Wales. Who better to chair this panel than Sara Boltman, who's CEO of Butterfly Data. You might have seen they have an exhibition space over there. If you haven't, it's another thing to do after this. But I'm going to hand over now to Sara and her panel as they set us forward into the future. Sara.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm your host for the session, and Butterfly Data are sponsoring this panel session. We help public sector clients get the best out of their data, and that includes clients like the Home Office and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. I'm delighted to have on stage with me. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a moment, but we're lucky to be joined by Luke Blackaby from Ofgem. He's the interim head of innovation. Chris Bailey from Swansea University, the Specific Project, and Richard Little from RWE. He's the director of Pembroke Net Zero Centre. So we're going to have a discussion about the global supply chain and how in Wales we're going to transition to net zero by 2050, but breaking that down into realistic steps over the next 10 years, 20 years, and so on. So Luke, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. Oh, blimey. Hi, I'm Luke Blackaby. Great to see you all. I coordinate, I'm head of the Innovation Hub team at Ofgem. There's two parts of that. One, which I'll talk about a lot today, which is the Strategic Innovation Fund. This is a 450 million fund, which focuses on big, risky, strategic projects that we think need to happen to try and reach net zero, but also support vulnerable consumers. And the other part is a policy team that works on innovation, provides innovation services. Very briefly, just about what the CIF's trying to do, because that's kind of the bit that I'm most focused on. We've structured it so that over 6 years we have 6 rounds, each of which have phases increasing in size. And the aim is to try and make sure we de-risk the projects, but also those projects get the right support that they need. One of the big changes we've made to how we've done this previously is we've introduced challenges. So the idea there is, previously it was perhaps not always clear what Ofgem saw as the direction of travel that was needed to try and make sure the industry moves towards net zero. We've introduced these challenges that we set up on an annual basis, 4 of them, usually 4, it could change, but probably 4. And the idea there is to make very, very clear what we see as the big issues that need to be addressed. This isn't the sum total of innovation funding that you can get. There's other different funds, but this one, it's meant to be the things that move us the needle, and to my mind, are these kind of larger projects that collectively we look back on 10 years' time and say, okay, these really had a significant impact. That I'm going to hand over.
Thanks. My name is Chris Bailey. I'm actually a business development manager at Specific. Specific is the Innovation Knowledge Centre in Swansea University. We've been around for about 10, 15 years now. And it's a research and development centre really focused on net zero technology development in partnership with industry. So it's gone from fundamental lab scale development of, say, solar cells, the next generation of solar cells, through to building scale demonstration of all of those technologies combined together in what we've called active buildings. So we created the active building kind of idea, which led to things like the Active Building Centre, Transforming Construction Challenge, with UKRI and a variety of other research angles for looking at how do we decarbonise buildings and built infrastructure and transport. The critical part is that they are generating energy, as much energy as possible on those buildings, using it, storing it in batteries and thermal stores, and then using it to provide power, heat and transport energy. And how do we do that in a smart way? How do we do it in a way that controls when we import and export energy, so we make no uncontrolled import and export? That's really the main purpose of it. But my role in particular is really about connecting that research base and the capability in South Wales with industry and those looking to benefit from that research in terms of decarbonising their own businesses, creating new products and services for the future. So looking at what that might entail in 10 or 15 years' time, and also kind of acting as what I describe as a knowledge broker. So really translating what we do to different audiences and being able to realise that in different sectors.
Afternoon. Richard Little, I'm the director of the Pembroke Net Zero Centre, RWE's collection of decarbonisation projects around Pembroke Power Station. Just taking a step back, RWE is the biggest power generator in the UK, not necessarily a brand that's familiar to everyone yet. We're also one of the biggest renewable producers in the world, and in the Welsh context, the biggest power producer and renewable power producer in Wales. We employ about 300 people in Wales in high-skilled jobs across a whole range of on and offshore wind, and we own and operate the Pembroke Power Station, which is the largest, most efficient CCGT, combined cycle gas turbine in the UK, and was the most efficient in Europe when it was built. The power station site down in Milford Haven there has a significant amount of land and is situated amongst heavy industry with oil refineries, LNG terminals. And we're seizing on that opportunity to bring renewable power, Celtic Sea development potentially, green hydrogen production, and decarbonisation of the main asset for security of supply when the wind's not blowing. So we're now the lead partner for the South Wales Industrial Cluster. South Wales industry equates to about 40% of Wales's total emissions, and we're working across South Wales to present industry with choices of electrification, renewable power ultimately, fuel switching for hydrogen, or carbon capture to storage. So one of my main objectives at the moment for the power station site is enabling CO2 shipping from South Wales. It's a key issue for South Wales in terms of not having pipeline access to depleted oil or gas stores. And we're working with our partners, Dragon LNG, as part of the South Wales cluster to deliver CO2 shipping to South Wales. So we're deploying batteries, stability projects, hydrogen combustion projects. There's a massive amount of work going on centred around the power station site.
Yeah, there are so many technical problems to be solved, aren't there? What kind of innovation are you looking at deploying over the next few years?
So for us, at the power station end, if you think of the power station as maybe the engine of the South Wales cluster in terms of driving some of the infrastructure into existence, we've got 5 big machines down at Pembroke, discrete power generation machines. So we've got the option to the opportunity to use those machines to try and drive a variety of technologies into being, and that's been our policy for 4 or 5 years now of what can we do with this asset in the context of the industry around us. So we've completed studies on combustion in the power station up to 40% already. We can do that almost immediately if we had access to hydrogen. We can go a lot further. So one of the innovative streams is, can we go to 100%? Yep. What do you need to do to the engines to allow that? Carbon capture, it's not particularly complex, but we haven't done it on this scale before. So for the world, carbon capture, you could say, is unproven at this scale, but actually it's not difficult to do. It's just difficult to build at this scale. So our issue is access, more than the constructability of it, it's access to CO2 shipping. You need to liquefy CO2 from South Wales and ship it away. So the ships are in development. We need pipelines, we need liquefaction. Yeah. And that opens up the capability for other industry in South Wales to access that. And more than anything, we need distribution. Yeah. So we need hydrogen distribution to allow us to produce hydrogen at scale, yeah, and transmit it to industries in South Wales, to give them the option to fuel switch if they haven't got access to either CO2 disposal or electrification. Grid is a big issue for South Wales. Yeah. That's been talked about, I'm sure. Yeah. Grid build out. If we're going to really maximise the opportunity of the Celtic Sea, we need to be able to land that power in South Wales, and we need to be able to distribute it for either direct use or for production of green hydrogen. Actually, yeah. So the two things don't go hand in hand. Oh, that's interesting. So when we were talking earlier, Chris, you were saying that. Fantastic. Thank you. When we were talking earlier about not just transmitting CO2, but also taking waste heat and reusing that,
Chris, you had some ideas, and you were talking about your smart building and how that can present a fixed load, almost like a virtual power plant to the grid, so that you can stabilise the grid. Because that's one of the things we really struggle with in South Wales, isn't it? Is a constrained grid is what's stopping us from adding more renewables into the mix, balancing that supply and demand. What does that mean? What have you learned in your project so far?
Absolutely. So the opportunity is there. We've designed buildings that have this level of control that we can present that fixed load to the grid, where the grid sees a building that would otherwise be peaky and kind of it's absorbing energy from the grid at random times based on load of the things that are contained within it, the people that are using it. But if you have PV and you have batteries and you have other means of energy generation and storage in that building, you're able to say, right, well, we can just trickle charge that building over a 24-hour period from the grid using, say, 500 watts or 1,000 watts constant import or export. So in the summer, you might run it to an export profile where you're constantly exporting a fixed amount to the grid. And then at some point, when the weather changes, you say, right, well, we're a point of net import. So we will import a kilowatt over the 24-hour period, and that will meet our daily cycle energy needs for that building. In doing so, what that creates is a predictability to the grid that is currently kind of, and it takes out the peaks and the troughs of the grid's production requirements. So instead of having to meet some massive gigawatt, megawatt number, you can reduce that down to a more fixed load demand, and then deploy the right assets to meet that need in a predicted way. And the reason we don't do this today is because most buildings operate independently of each other. They aren't smartly connected in any way, and they don't make conscious decisions about energy import and export. So we enable that through those smart controls. And we've done demonstrator buildings that have this capability. They've shown that they can run a net zero operational profile on an annual cycle. And the buildings we've built have been designed and built by our in-house design manager, basically to be net zero in construction, but also dismantleable and recyclable because they are modular construction buildings. Circular economy principles, and all those things that we should be thinking about when we build new buildings. One more point on that is that there's a figure floating around then that says in 2050, 80% of the buildings that we will have in 2050 are already built. So retrofit is actually one of the biggest problems we'll have, not necessarily building new buildings that are energy efficient. So how do we create a scenario where we integrate those technologies and those smart controls into existing building infrastructure and allow it to be adaptable and flexible to create an easier job for the likes of Ofgem and others where they have to deploy flexibility or generation assets through RWE and so forth. So that's the part we play. So I'm sat in the middle of these two.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So Luke, we mentioned a couple of things there. So we mentioned carbon capture and storage and decarbonisation of heavy industry. So those are some of your existing priorities. And then flexibility. What else is important for the coming year? What can those innovators out there who've been pitching on the challenge stage earlier on today, what can they be getting their thinking caps on and inventing to then come and pitch to Ofgem?
I think I would take almost a step back. I was kind of pondering this in the last couple of weeks around how I'd frame this. To my mind, there are kind of three big groups of kind of innovations that we need. The first one is innovations to things that we're already doing and doing them better. So an example of that would be digital platform for leakage analytics or the intelligent gas grid. These are projects that have gone through various phases of SIF that look at how you can try and model the system better. Another example would be how you try and model what weather events are going to happen. So those are things which you're kind of like, we need to happen. We know they're there, and it's about improving with new technology that we have. There's then this kind of second bunch, which is things like CrowdFlex, which was this large project looking at flexibility. That's one of the biggest demonstrators we have at the moment. It's a beta. And the idea there is we know that we have to move towards a more flexible system. So it's looking at what are the things that we know need to happen in the next 5 years. So we need to have a more flexible system. We need to have a lot more EVs on the system. We also need to have a lot more heat pumps on the system. So there are things that we know from government are there. The trickier part comes these kind of moonshots. And these are the things which are these 5, 10, 15 years out. And that's where a lot of my thinking is going on at the moment, because we're trying to work on our future price control. And so there's a question of how do we actually try and enable these big blocks. I think one that if my colleague who works on this with me were here, she would poke me saying long duration storage. That's her kind of big bugbear. And I think it's one of those classic ones. Whoever you talk to within Ofgem will have the areas they work on, who are the kind of biggest areas of interest. But to my mind, there's, yes, decarbonisation of heavy industry. There's also, we need to look at heavy transport as well. That's something that we had transport kind of challenges earlier on in CIF. We didn't see as much come from, well, we saw some really good things come through, but there's a lot more to be done there. And to my mind, those are kind of two big areas that are kind of sitting on the back burner, which when we come doing our next round of challenges are going to be at the forefront. We're still working out how we do those. And there are still some big questions around, do you want to give the industry, one thing that we already know is going to happen with the pitchings that are happening at the moment is there's tons. Yeah. So it may be the case that some have to come back next year. So to my mind, we might make some changes. There'll almost certainly be consistency between what we have now, or some consistency, and what we have next year. But there are still these other few areas that I would say are kind of bubbling underneath.
It's interesting to hear you call it a moonshot, because it is that level of ambition, isn't it? It's the moonshot of our generation. But in a way, it is also one of the most pressing challenges that we face. So it's not a frivolous thing to go send someone back to the moon. But when you look at the amount of technology that did come out of the NASA programs to send people to the moon, there were so many benefits that came out. So what's the size of the prize for UK PLC as an industry as a whole? How much intellectual property and how many inventions do you think there could be if we decide to be at the forefront of this globally?
I think I'll give a kind of broad response, which is one of the big aims we have from the CIF is to try and enable that. We're very conscious that there is, to an extent, a growing competitive situation for everything you need to do net zero. We're in the UK is doing relatively well. It's kind of, compared to many other countries, it's further along. But as you get an entire global kind of shift happening, it's going to become much more competitive. So we're trying to do there is move quickly and move early. I think the opportunity is massive, but it's about us, Ofgem, enabling that through the innovation funding we have, and also making sure that we make sure these projects get rolled out and things that get tested actually get brought to life. Because I think one of the challenges that we're going to have is there can be an immense amount of work and funding that goes on. If we don't think through very clearly how it gets rolled out, it'll be wasted to an extent, and then someone else somewhere else could do it. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. It's about us being as kind of almost rigorous as we can and making sure we try and bring this into things that are going to stay in the UK. There's actually some really interesting NIC projects as well, the precursor to CIF, which look to trying to manufacture things more here. And that's, let's say we were to do a challenge in the future around supply chains, that's something that I would hope would come out of it.
Yeah. That's a fantastic point around supply chains, because we will need lots of stuff, lots of raw materials, lots of semiconductors, and how do we make sure that we've got what we want? From a Swansea point of view, what research is going on to make sure that we have what we need?
So the supply chain is so diverse. There's so many different facets to it. In terms of the built environment, you've got modular buildings. We talked about, how do we create buildings that are more easily and sort of more consistently deployable, that have an element of controlled or understood embodied carbon, and then looking to at least compensate for that, or in some way build with a conscious mind to, do we need to build in a certain way in order to meet a certain problem? I think what we've got in more broad terms is that things like, outside of my wheelhouse to some extent, but things like EVs and batteries, right? You've got this notion that EV batteries and batteries in general are going to be hard to treat and have this waste problem that we're going to have. The reality is that second life of EV batteries is such an infant market at the moment, because we've only had large-scale kind of deployment of them for the last 10 years, 12 years, and those ones are only now aging out. And we haven't got a sort of a significant recycling market, but we will have. It's developing, and it's coming as part of the natural progression of that technology. So we're in a massive transition phase where all of these things are first of a kind type of things that we're doing, including the buildings we've built and all of the products and supply chains that will come from that. So we're massive learning phase, and it's quite unsettling then, not upsetting, yeah. Unsettling in that.
Disruptive, I think,
disruptive.
Is the trendy
I mean, even unsettling to some extent, because you don't necessarily know what's coming. Because it adapts so quickly to what the next thing is. And as an example, I've got batteries in my house I've recently installed that were second life batteries from somebody else's house.
Right.
Like, they were taken out because they'd upgraded to a Tesla Powerwall or something fancy. Yeah. So I took their old batteries and I put those in my house. They might live for another 5 years and work. Yeah. They're not destroyed, not being recycled. They're still working. Yeah. So there's an element of being able to do that in other things. The same for the EV market as well. That's growing. We have lots of cheaper EVs, and therefore that's an opportunity to to pick them up secondhand and use them for a longer life,
Yeah.
or to reinvent them with new batteries and things like that.
But you have to look at that whole life cost. You have to plan ahead quite far, don't you? So we're going from one extreme to the other. There are startups that are applying for funding that have maybe, if they don't get the funding, if they don't get the investment, then they might not be around in 2 years' time, to university projects and collaborations that are in place for 2 to 5 years, to RWE planning 15 years ahead. So from an RWE point of view, how do you make sure that your future supply chain is in place? What barriers are there to being able to do what you want to do?
I think you described it well as a moonshot.
Yeah.
We're trying to replace over 100 years worth of energy system design in what looks more like 10 to 15 years. It's massive. It's a huge engineering challenge across all the options we've talked about. If you take something like floating wind, which we're hopeful that we will win a gigawatt out of the 4.5 that's going in the first round. To deliver that, you have a huge opportunity to try and internalise that into Wales, and deliver long-term benefit, long-term jobs. But the opportunity is quite short. If you allow the external markets to establish themselves, external ports, external steel construction, external blades, nacelles, etc., once they're there, it's always going to be cheaper to go to them. So this is our real shot now to try and do something bold around this whole supply chain piece. And it's enormous. At the moment, the supply chains can't cope with what we need to do. If you go across wind, hydrogen, carbon capture, the whole piece, it's enormous. All the pipes and wires we need to build, we simply can't do it. But we need to be very bold about committing to internalise as much as we can. And that can be done through mechanisms such as incentivising local content through the CFD rounds that pay for these things, doing some bold government funding that assists ports to build infrastructure, get the laydown arranged, build the deep water ports, give ourselves the capability to do it, try and internalise steel production for the manufacture. So really we are at a point now. We've been talking about this for years, right? But
it needs that stable long-term investment and roadmap.
If we don't seize the opportunity over the next 5 years, others will have established the capabilities, and we will find ourselves using them because it's cheaper. So now is the time to be building the ports, to build the skills pipelines, to start making people understand this long-term opportunity that could be there, to give the supply chains the confidence to spend money to be able to supply everything across this whole piece, from the big stuff to the smaller stuff.
Yeah. And in terms of skills, you were talking earlier, the two of you, and I kind of came into the end of the conversation and said, "Oh, can you repeat this on the stage, please?" Because for those floating wind turbines, there will be a whole new category of jobs, won't there, to kind of the subsea marine engineers that will need training in deep sea diving, and there'll be underwater remote vehicle operators and designers of remote vehicles, and more opportunities for remote vehicles to be designed for specific purposes. So that's cleaning algae off.
It's absolutely massive. The floating wind piece alone is massive, but if you look at it holistically across everything that we've got to do, South Wales industry at the moment employs about 113,000 people. And you can decarbonise South Wales industry quite simply by closing all that down. And that's 40% of Wales's CO2 sorted.
And all our jobs.
Right, and it all goes somewhere else. And now that's what we need to work to. That's what South Wales Cluster is working to avoid. So to protect those jobs, we need to deploy these technologies rapidly. Otherwise, businesses are forced by targets and incentives and legal limits to move elsewhere, and they won't necessarily move to the UK, they'll move somewhere else. So that's what we're working to protect as the first thing. To do that, you need to do the whole spectrum, all the way from floating wind through hydrogen production to give the opportunity to the fuel switch and the carbon capture this construction. So even for the power station site, where the piece I try and coordinate, we're looking at what could be 8 to 10 years of heavy construction to just build the carbon capture for that facility. We estimate some 2,000 jobs right across the spectrum, from labourers to welders to scaffolders to planners to project managers, electrical engineers, instrument engineers, the whole spectrum. Then you need all of the consenting people to do the planning, to do the environmental permit. It's absolutely huge. You need the legal people to do the negotiations that we need to do, commercial people. It's enormous, and we go to the colleges now and the schools to try and talk about this, and the kids know all about climate change. They're absolutely on it. They get it all the way through school now. We understand the emergency. We get it. What they have, the penny hasn't dropped, and we just get this every time we go. This huge lifetime opportunity that they could be any one of this spectrum of stuff. They could be in marine, the boats, anchorage, the whole piece. It's enormous. It's lifetimes of work near where they live now, and they still haven't quite realised that if they channel into any one of these spectrums, they could do it.
Yeah.
But even if we captured all of them, we need retrained people. We need unemployed people to start doing pockets of, micro qualifications, if you like, to try and pick up parts of this enormous piece that needs to be done now. Ex-military people, we're looking at the whole spectrum. It has to be all of that. And I think we're at a point now, we're as a single business, we're not having the impact. Clearly, the penny's not dropping with people, what's there. It probably wants some coordinated government level push to do something like you see the army adverts.
Or collaboration with your local universities. Yeah. So the specific example we were talking about there was they're underwater. But are you seeing people coming through and wanting to do their PhDs and knowing that there is going to be a career for them in Pembrokeshire and renewables, or do they kind of qualify and then want to?
Yeah, interesting. There is this need to envision what the skills of the future might be, and there's organisations like Net Zero Skills Wales looking at this and trying to picture what the future Tata Steel worker looks like, or what the future transportation system works like. Will automation and self-driving have a problem? Create a problem in terms of who's doing what? There's all these things to consider. But for university perspective and research tends to focus more on these kind of technology or materials-led problems. And when people are kind of getting into that, especially for things, Tata is a great example because it's very metallurgy or materials-led. There's all these complex problems to solve within producing steel or any material where you have to, there's very small things you can concentrate a whole load of time on. So they will always be there. And more so as we move to decarbonise steel, and we're looking at different processes for making steel. So there's an inherent educational requirement in that is tied into industry. But if we're looking more outside of, say, heavy industries into the other things that we're looking at, even making like heat pumps is obviously a very interesting one. Heating engineers, the complexity of how you install a heat pump correctly is one of the biggest problems we're having. Is that you can install one, you can physically plumb it in quite simply, but understanding the dynamics of pumping water around and what the intricacies of that create efficiency problems or reductions means that you can go from having a system that is below parity with current price of gas, for instance, and then you're paying more in your electricity to run that house for heating, to a well-designed system being 30 or 40% cheaper than gas. Yeah. So it's that level of disparity depending on how good the install design is. And then you've got, I won't name any names, you can go and look at the organizations that are promoting that. So that sits beyond academia, that is in industry, that's the training that's being provided by those industries. Where we sit, and the thing that we provide as a really interesting, useful piece of that problem is the de-risking of new technology. So if we are creating in collaboration with industry or individuals, someone who's got a great idea and they need to access funding through Ofgem or other, DESNES and all of these other UKRI type funding next door. Yep. We've got these collaborative funding opportunities where we can help organizations.
Yeah. Like a living lab.
Living labs and access to data, which we've talked about. We've got net zero data.
The most important resource of all.
Absolutely right. But people don't consider it. How do you store data? Who manages it? Where does it go? What do you do with it in 5 years' time? We've been collecting data for 10, 15 years on net zero buildings, on how PV interacts with batteries and how it interacts with the weather and all of those things. So we've got this kind of, there's global databases that replicate the same thing. So what do you do with it? Yeah. How do you make it work for you to solve the problems that we're looking to solve? Yeah. And that's really where the academic space sits. We have a sandbox to explore these things and to come up with those solutions, demonstrate them from a lab to a physical building, which is what we've done, and everything in between on the TRLs, the technology readiness levels, and then come out at the end of that with a commercialized, de-risked, first-of-a-kind type product, which is ready for market.
Fantastic. So when it comes to those technology readiness levels, You're looking for ideas that you can take from what, TRL 4 up to 7, 3 or 4? Yeah. So being able to collaborate, being able to find a startup that can then, so I guess the ideal mixture is what, a startup with an idea and then a large renewable generator where they're the route to market in the ideal place, and then an academic living lab to go test it with. Do you see most projects coming together like that, or do you do the matchmaking?
It's a real mix. So in terms of how the matchmaking works, one of the things that we're very conscious of is that networks are very good at knowing what they need a lot of the time. We do try and make sure that they get the support going into the networks. So, example of UKRI, I think next door, UKRI deliver the SIF, and we have a team, and part of what they do is when applications come in, they try and provide feedback, they try and provide support. There's also, we're very lucky to have excellent organisations like the EIC or the ENA who actually can provide that kind of feedback if people need help early on. I think one of the challenges we've had though at the moment or so far is, and this is one that anyone has any thoughts on, tell me how we can do it better, is for small innovators, it is risky. It's always going to be risky.
Yeah.
And so what we want to see is small innovators, larger organizations, universities coming together, but it's one that we're still we have not perfected at all how we get them in.
Yeah.
And it's when you look at the kind of the profile across these different phasing amounts, one of the things that still I think is a shame is that we don't have enough examples where you can say, right, look, there's a really small innovator comes with a kind of out there idea and then gets brought through. We're trying to improve that with things like the base camp, which some of you may be aware of. It's what we're going to run in again in this year, I think, early next year. It sets out problem statements to try and make it as simple as possible and then give more time for innovators to come forward. But it is one thing that I really would like to kind of get better to addressing in the future price control, how we actually set something up that works for those early ideas. And whether it is, there's ideas like you could have an accelerator or you could have more established support for those small innovators. To me, they're things we need to explore in the kind of coming 2 years, and we'll do market engagement on.
Yeah. So you're inviting them all to Liverpool at the end of the month, is that right?
Yes. We have the Energy Innovation Summit at the end of the month in Liverpool. For those of you who can make it, please do come. The idea is we've got 2 days of, similar to this, I imagine, of panels, talks from industry leaders, and there's going to be a mixture of dissemination, so saying what's happening, what are the big innovations that have taken place over the last few years that you should learn about, but also then having a kind of discussion around where we need to go, what's the kind of the future here. So again, similar to this, but in a kind of much grander scale, this kind of discussion. I think, to my mind, the main thing we want to try and do is demonstrate that the UK is a good place to come and do this stuff. It shouldn't just be inward looking, and so we're trying to make sure we get some good international speakers come and present what they think as well.
Excellent. I'd like to have 10 minutes to take questions from the audience, if there are any. Are there any online? No? Any questions from the audience? Do you mind taking that over there?
Hi, I'm Sara John. I'm a director for ALS training. We're an apprenticeship provider and jobs with Wales provider in Wales. I don't know if you know, in Wales, education has devolved, so apprenticeships are different here to what they are in England. One of the things that we work very closely with Cardiff and Vale College, our parent company, and one of the things that you were talking about, Richard, was the colleges and preparedness. The challenge we have is the jobs. So are the jobs there? And they're not there yet. So somebody could commit to doing a course for 2 years, and then actually they don't know that there is something there at the end of it. We have an apprenticeship at the moment in Net Zero, which is for an individual in an employer who can look at the plan, and particularly in Wales where we've got so many SMEs, to help them to prepare for the future. But what do you think is the solution to that?
Yeah, it's a problem we're all battling with, actually. Is the belief has to be there, and we're not quite at a point where you can point at CO2 shipping is coming, the framework's agreed, we're building it. We haven't quite established the hydrogen business model. We're not quite there, but the pace is brutal. We have to go fast. So we kind of need to start now on the belief that it will come. And I think it will soon resolve itself. I honestly do. I think within the next couple of years, we'll have committed to a whole spectrum of projects that people will see it's coming. But we really could do with it now. So the way I think about it is more along the lines of floating wind, for example. We need access to that renewable power. The Crown Estate are busy doing the auction rounds. As RWE, we don't know if we're going to be successful, right? So there are lots of people competitively trying to build it, but believe someone will build it. So start training people like you. We don't want to let anyone down. We don't want to create a belief in someone that they've done all this training and then come out the other end, there's nothing for them. But the way we're approaching that is, we don't mind being part of training them. They will come out the end, someone will build it, even if it's not us, and there will be a job. That's the thing, isn't it? The difficulty is how much will be internalised to Wales, how much can we do? We're not far from actually doing that. What I think we use this time now is we get ourselves organised across the colleges as to who's doing what, where are the centres of excellence, where are we specialising, what's the spectrum of jobs that we need. Let's at least agree that at government level and make sure we're organised. The Freeport helps a bit, the Freeport that's been established in terms of recycling and getting the funding to allow that to happen. It's all there, but I completely get there is a certain amount of belief, but so true of do you believe that the hydrogen will be there? As a developer of multi-billion-pound projects, there's a certain amount of belief at the moment, but the climate crisis is real, right? And the targets are real, so we have to believe it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite inspired by what Scotland are doing. They've gone and said, right, we can generate enough renewable electricity for ourselves and export south of the border to England as well. So we're going to smash our targets and meet them early. In Wales, we have a similar low population, great natural resources, plenty of coastline that you can put wind, wave, and tidal energy deployments around. We just need to. There are some exciting high-tech developments that are needed, but there are also some really boring administrative revolutions that are needed as well in, like, say, permitting. So if Natural Resources Wales had a few extra people to clear that backlog of permitting and get the grid infrastructure strengthened and provide permissions for things, then we'd be able to step ahead, really.
Yeah, we're working, by the way, with National Resources Wales on getting the resource at least funded. Whether there's enough skilled people there is another issue, but all of that needs to come. The UK does have a massive natural resource. The carbon storage in the UK is the best in Europe. We have to believe that there's a whole market for servicing Europe's need to dispose of CO2. We have to get ourselves in a position where we've set that up from a shipping perspective. We've got great natural gas terminals, liquefied natural gas terminals that make us resilient. We've got a great wind resource all around the country. And actually, we've got a very good regulatory framework, and business models are coming and looking world class. So it is all coming together. I'm here representing South Wales Cluster, and and we're trying to protect that as well. So,
any other questions?
Hi. So I'm quite interested from each of you. Is there any key problem that you see affecting, from your perspective, coming up ahead for net zero? It doesn't have to be the biggest or the summary, or it could be, but any particular one, and any big gaps or any gaps that you've been noticing where we're just not hitting it at the moment.
I think big problem, a kind of elephant in the room is the geopolitical stuff. So we are in the last 2 weeks, you can see that there's going to be things that are maybe not the same as Ukraine, but have significant impact. And that's going to, I think, tie quite closely with a lot of kind of macro trends that are going to make it harder and harder. We can kind of have as good a plan as we want, but there's going to be things outside to make it much trickier to try and do what we're trying to do. And I think that's a reality we sort of have to accept. I think the second thing with that is the cost of transition is going to be quite high. And trying to work out how we communicate that very clearly is important. I think that there's way it's going to be incredibly beneficial, but there's still things you have to kind of work out. I mean, right now, certain technologies are quite expensive. So just thinking through and being kind of prepared for the fact that there are going to be kind of hurdles to face in the kind of coming 10 years around how you communicate that really, really well. Because long term, the value is absolutely there. But there are going to be some short-term things that are just quite expensive, and that's kind of fine. As with any technology, when it's new, it is expensive. Then it should be much lower price pretty soon. So to my mind, those are two things which absolutely solvable, but are going to be kind of big challenges in the next 10 years or so.
For me, I think it's going to be really focusing on the fact that we need really strong leadership in this space. We need people with vision for what, a long-term vision for what the aim is. What are we trying to achieve? We're talking about net zero, and net zero being the aim. And we've got this line in the sand of 2050, but it's not just about 2050. It's about forever. And how do we envisage a change? It's great to have milestones, but in reality, every decision we make should be considered on a framework. And in Wales, we are able to look at that from a perspective where we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, for instance, where we can consider everything we do, certainly from a public perspective, under that framework and say, is it the right thing to be doing? And then make a decision based on that under all those criteria. So I think what we're going to have the problem with is distraction based on smaller problems that come up and the things that are in front of us. But we also need to revert back to that overarching vision to say, right, well, actually, yeah, this is a road, a fork in the road, and we have a decision to make, and one of those is the right way if what we're aiming for is X. So it's maintaining that leadership and that momentum towards what we're trying to achieve, and in doing so, actually achieving what we were hoping, envisaging as part of that.
Yeah, I'll sort of echo that really. Stability of leadership, stability of targets. Rowing back on net zero targets being controversial a little bit now is really unhelpful. We need absolutely clear signals that drive then investment, skills, supply chain confidence, the whole piece. If you start moving those back or giving any signals that they're moving, then all of that collapses. We've talked about where we are world leading at the moment in terms of where we are positioning ourselves in the net zero world. That is going to be expensive to build all this stuff, but the overall benefit is going to be positive. We're proving that through the reports that we're currently generating about the value to South Wales. Our view at the moment is that yes, you're going to build a load of expensive stuff, but the net present value of decarbonising South Wales through CO2 capture is around 16 billion over 15 years. So you drive supply chains, you drive jobs, and effectively you then open up the capability of the UK to actually act as a disposal site for Europe. The benefit is huge, but we need clear leadership.
It's changing that mindset, though, isn't it? We can't solve tomorrow's problems with today's thinking. We need to get into people's minds that it's going to change. You've already been through one major change with moving from coal to gas, but in order to get this in the net zero idea into people's minds, you mentioned that there might be an immersive experience that would actually train and educate people when they're on their holidays, when they have a rainy day, they can go to the Pembroke Net Zero Centre and learn about the future world.
Alluding to the fact I used to manage Aberthaw Coles Power Station, which was near Barry here, which was our lead site in the UK. It ran more than any other station in the RWE fleet, and it went from full load operation to effectively zero over a period of 3 years. Very painful transition for the people that worked there. Several hundred people, very worried about that transition and what that would do to them. But it was pressure on carbon that did that, and it's pressure on carbon and stability of the emissions trading system and the price of carbon that's driving investment in wind and this whole transition. So stability on that, stability on the targets. I'm repeating myself.
No, that is absolutely fantastic.
The interactive experience. Part of this, how do you wake kids up to what's going on? We're looking at the possibility within the Freeport context as well of developing something that can really grab kids and parents. Actually, parents are key to this attention around not just the history of where we've come from and the energy sort of history of Milford Haven, for example, has been an energy port for 100 years. There's a lot of history there, and you can see the cycles of change. This is just another one. It's just big and it's fast.
Yeah, it's big.
And try and wake them up to the exciting opportunities ahead. I mean, there's innovation, there's tech, and then there's a lot of stuff. Everyone doesn't have to be an engineer, but they should be able to see an opportunity through this.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you to all my panellists for today. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've learned something. Hope people online have enjoyed it too. Thanks very much.